Hi there, I'm Ken Lammers. Welcome to Minor League Matters. And today we're going to talk about why I think Cincinnati, or FC Cincinnati, moving to the Major League Soccer, MLS, could be a mistake. I really didn't plan on making this video until I got some major pushback. Well, not major, but fairly solid pushback on a few comments I made on the last soccer cast I put up. And I kind of offhand threw out the fact that I thought that FC Cincinnati going to MLS could be a mistake, and I got some solid fans that were sending me notes saying that they didn't believe me. And that's good because FC Cincinnati needs people not to believe me in order for this to work for them. I did want to break it down a little bit though and show what my rationale for this is. Okay, so here we have both the MLS map and the USL map, right? You can see here, if you look closely enough, that the MLS doesn't put teams together. This has caused a lot of problems for the MLS, which they have not shown any kind of intent to cure. The MLS is a huge problem where people don't watch any team but their own, right? They come out to their stadium and watch the team as an event, right? And then they go home and they don't tune in to MLS to watch other teams. This is a very minor league attitude and a very minor league problem, right? You create the event. People come out for the event, right, which is centered around the soccer match, and then you leave and go home and you don't care about the rest of it. And this is a significant problem that the MLS has had and does not seem to be trying to solve. Now, if you look at the USL map, what you see is that USL, which obviously is not franchising as large a zone, ends up with teams that are within playing distance of each other. Quite a few of these teams are within pretty close distance. Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Louisville, and then you see these little clumps everywhere. But what we see here is because of the more proximate locations of a lot of the USL teams, you have more natural rivalries, right? So let's look at this a little bit closer. Now here on the left we have a map which has got Cincinnati to Louisville and Cincinnati to Indianapolis, and of course there's also the way between Louisville and Indianapolis. These are all 2 hours or less drive, right? The kind of distances that fans drive. And there, if you doubt me, Louisville and FC Cincinnati, fans drive back and forth to see those rivalry games, right? The derbies. I don't know why we have to call them what they call them in England, but they're rivalry games. Louisville and Cincinnati fans will drive back and forth, right? I suspect, given it a couple of years, Indianapolis would have been the same way. So this is natural rivalries for Cincinnati that are going to disappear, as well as the other rivalries that everybody talks about with Cincinnati. There's a rivalry with the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, which basically kind of comes out of the fact that the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers have a rivalry, but it's still a rivalry that's grown. And there's a lot of people try to make a rivalry out of Cincinnati and Charlotte, North Carolina, because Charlotte and Cincinnati both call themselves Queen City, the Queen City. I'm not sure that one really has legs, but it's another one that's going to disappear because all these USL rivalries are gone. That leaves Cincinnati with only one rival really close to them, and that's Columbus at about 2 hours, maybe a little bit less. The road to Columbus and the Hell is Real derby, or the Hell is Real rivalry game, named after a billboard halfway between them, right? Okay, that's fine if Columbus is going to be there. Precor, I think, would still move Columbus in a hot second, if he can. And unfortunately, MLS seems to be backing him in this. This is the only rivalry. We're cutting down, FC Cincinnati from having, Louisville, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Charlotte, we'll say Charlotte. So there's 4 rivalries. We're cutting it down to 1. That's assuming that MLS doesn't use Cincinnati as their Ohio team while they move Columbus to Texas for their 3rd Texas team. What do we have if Columbus actually moves to Austin? Well, then instead of having, the left hand here where you've got 3 within easy driving distance, which fans will drive back and forth to, and then Pittsburgh, which fans will probably drive back and forth to too, you end up with this, right? These are the closest teams in most directions, most every direction, to Cincinnati. You've got Chicago, not a natural rival, not in any way, shape, or form. You have Toronto, again, not a natural rival. You have DC United, again, not a natural rival, not anywhere near Cincinnati. You have Atlanta, nope, not there. And then you have Nashville. Nashville is the closest team to Cincinnati if Columbus goes away. And there's nothing there that's ever been a natural rivalry at all. It's just, I think it's about a 4 to 5 hour drive to get to Nashville from Cincinnati. It's not a drive that anybody really makes, right? It's just not a way it goes. This then ends up with Cincinnati not having any rivals, not really having any rivalry games, and not having the inspiration it's had in the past. When it's playing Louisville, or when it's playing Pittsburgh, or when it's playing Columbus in the Opens, right? So it kind of leaves, like a lot of the other MLS teams, it just leaves Cincinnati out there floating by itself. And again, we get back to the point where nobody in Cincinnati cares about any of the other teams in the MLS, and therefore nobody watches anything. They come out to the Cincy event and then they go home, right? This will most likely end up with things going on like, well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so now we see what happens if Columbus leaves. God help them. I hope Columbus stays, save the crew, but this is a serious possibility. Now let's look at attendances in the MLS. Cincinnati has been the king of attendance in USL with, an average last year of 21,000, right? All these numbers are rounded to the thousand. So 21,000 last year was the average attendance at Cincinnati. Now, there were a couple of open games. I don't think those were counted in the attendance, which might have popped it up some. But here's what we're generally looking at as regular attendance in Cincinnati is 21,000. There are at least 7 teams that get better attendance than that in the MLS, right? While I did round off the other teams, I put Cincinnati next to the team that had the closest attendance to it, average-wise. I think Cincinnati averaged, when you looked at actual numbers, about 20 more people per match than New York Red Bulls, but effectively they're the same level, right? There are 4 other teams that are, within the top 10 that are right there at the same level as FC Cincinnati, and we'll see where what happens with that. The teams above are, obviously Atlanta United and Seattle Sounders are just going to stay way up above everybody else. And then you end up with Toronto, the league champions, Orlando City, New York FC, LA Galaxy, Vancouver, and then you get the rest are Red Bulls, Portland, and so Minnesota United ended up in 10th place. Cincinnati has gotten 21,000 average. And its new stadium that Cincinnati's building is only going to seat 21,000 people. Their stadium is going to be the 13th largest in the MLS, and others are really right there next to them as far as size. The attendance thing is something else, right? Okay, anybody who's watched sports for a while knows what the honeymoon period is. It's the 5-year period after which your team is founded, in which your team has good attendance, and you really shouldn't start averaging what your team's attendance is until after the 5 years when it settles down. Cincinnati, on top of being in the honeymoon period, had an amazing run last year in the Open, which you know pushed it way up, attendance wise. So it's done really well. It has not been the best team in the USL. Louisville clearly was the best team last year, but FC Cincinnati has done well, and this year they're one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the East. Generally Louisville is better, but Cincinnati's right there behind them, and so that's keeping their attendance up. Okay, so they're going to move to the MLS. Obviously, they are not going to be a big attendance team in the MLS. They're going to be a average, mediocre attendance team in the MLS, surpassed by several above them. And the first 5 years, particularly the first year to 2 years, they're going to have a boom in attendance, right? There will be a lot of people coming to games. But they're not going to be one of the top teams in the MLS. The odds are they don't do that well the next few years. Could they be a Las Vegas Knights story? Yes, it's possible. Highly unlikely, but possible. The more realistic thing is to say that they kind of dribble along the first couple of years with a non-winning record, and then we start seeing what happens with the crowds, right? Yes, somebody pointed out to me that they're the fan groups and that. Yes, the fan groups exist. I think Columbus Crew used to have 3 or 4 of them that have all merged into one because they slowly dribbled away, right? The fan groups, I don't know if Cincinnati's got more than one or not. I think they've only got really one. They're an interesting side effect in soccer, but they're not enough to carry it by themselves. I think they will provide some support for the team, but that's not enough. It really, seriously is not enough. You've got to bring in the regular Joe Schmo and Jane Schmo to watch the games, or else you're just not going to make it. Okay, so if Cincy, where are Cincy's fans going to come from, right? FC Cincinnati. FC Cincinnati's fans are more limited than other Cincinnati teams, right? The Cincinnati Reds have fans all, south of them throughout Kentucky and probably up to Dayton area, right? Or solid fan bases. Because Dayton has Cincinnati's single A team and Louisville has Cincinnati's triple A team. And if they had any brains in their heads, they'd figure out some way to get the team in Lexington to be their advanced A team, but that's another thing. Anyway, it gives the Reds a wider zone, right? They pull from West Virginia, far southwest Virginia, pretty much all the way down to Tennessee and through Kentucky, through like the western areas, Kentucky somewhat, fading out, of course, as it goes along. But they have a pretty solid wide base. The football team has a pretty good going as well. The pro football team, there's no pro team in Columbus. There's no pro team in Louisville. The next nearest pro team is what? Nashville? I mean, they don't have that much going on, so they get a lot more, spread out. Well, here's what you got for Cincinnati. You've got the Cincinnati area. And I suspect that a lot of that is going to be north of the river. I'm not sure that they're going to carry much south of the river. I assume they'd carry some, probably out of the Catholic schools. Cincinnati is going to have fairly good support out of the city itself, at least to begin with. But its normal areas of support down south are not going to be there as much, right? Yeah, they might pull some people up from Lexington, and maybe a few from the other hinterlands of Kentucky. Although Kentucky's a basketball area, there's gonna be a It's not going to be competitive if there's basketball going on. It's not going to be competitive if there's football going on. And baseball, semi-competitive, right? It's also not going to have as wide a zone because there's a soccer team in Indianapolis. There's a soccer team in Louisville. Assuming Columbus keeps theirs, there's a soccer team in Columbus. So it's not going to have those zones to draw from. And let's face it, soccer is more of a metropolitan sport, actually a suburb sport, than the other sports are. So, somebody in Clark County, Kentucky, or someplace like that is not going to be, really all that thrilled about soccer most of the time. They're football, baseball, basketball, that's it. And I don't know how they're going to do it. And I keep hearing people send me things like, yes, they have a huge youth soccer thing, youth soccer program. Well, there's big youth soccer programs all over the United States, and consistently, when it hits high school, soccer dies. There are reasons for this. The fact that the academy system is set up, and if you're part of these academies, you can't play in high school, which is the root of most American sports, is a big reason for this, right? If you come up to high school level, you either go off to that academy or you play football, baseball, or basketball. This is it, and I don't see them drawing a huge amount out of what's down here in Kentucky and, much beyond Cincinnati. So they're going to have a limited zone they're drawing people from. Okay, so that's the bad news, what I see about the bad parts of it. The good parts of it are this. Cincinnati is a very strong sports city, right? For goodness sake, they're still supporting the Bengals and the Reds. And of course, there's the Cincinnati Cyclones, which is basically AA hockey, which draws over 5,000 people per game. And when they're in season, playing 2 or 3 games a week, which is impressive numbers for a AA team. And so they do have a good tradition. What I'm worried about is what happens here being kind of what happened in Columbus. Now, hopefully, the whoever is in charge of dealing with them in Cincinnati will lock them in with some sort of agreement that they will be in the stadium for the next 20 years or something like that, right? They really need to do something like that to make sure they stay. After the honeymoon period, after the 5 years, you will expect the crowds will drop, right? I know the hardcore fans are, no, we're here, we're going to be here forever. Yes, of course you are. But you don't get 21,000 hardcore fans. You get 5 to 10,000 hardcore fans if you're really lucky and you have a large enough municipality and a large enough draw. You get that. And then you get a bunch of people that are not hardcore fans that are coming out to an event every week, right? Or once or twice a year or 5 times a year or something like that, right? And so you got to watch. Those people will tail off after a time period. And unless FC Cincinnati just remains amazing, right? But generally, the odds are they'll tail off after about 5 years. As I see them then going to about where Columbus is now. Maybe not quite as bad because Columbus's problems are also partially because the guy who's running it is incompetent and seems to be trying to push crowd sizes down. Let's say that they get down to about 17,000, 15,000 attendance per game, right? Or even 17,000. 17,000 in Columbus is enough that they're talking about moving the team. So what happens in Cincinnati if they get there and that's what they're drawing is fairly typical crowds? You have to worry then that you get a jerk like Precor coming in and taking the team and trying to move it someplace else, right? Where else? Well, I mean, there are spots. He could move his MLS franchise to the Raleigh-Durham area, which really wants one. He could move the MLS franchise to Charlotte. He could move the MLS franchise to someplace in Florida. He could move it to, Detroit. All these places that have tried, or St. Louis, probably be a really good place to move one. That's a huge temptation. And like I said, I hope that somebody in the municipality in Cincinnati is somehow locking them in. We're going to build this parking for you, but in exchange for this, you're going to sign this contract that says you're here for 20 years, right? We're going to sell you this land for this stadium, exchange for that 20 years, something like that. They need to really lock it in. It's kind of a shame they didn't get the stadium down on the river where they've got, the hockey, the baseball, and the football. It's a shame they didn't do that, or weren't able to do that to work. I imagine that would have cost an arm and a leg, although I don't know. Newport might have been a place they could have done it. They chose not to. In the end, I don't think FC Cincinnati will fail. I just think that FC Cincinnati is going to come into the MLS and be mediocre or mediocre minus, right? And that once the reality sets in, the crowd sizes will fall, the excitement will drain away somewhat, and it probably won't be what it is now, particularly if the stadium only seats 21,000. And they're going to move from being a big dog in the USL with natural rivals and turn into a medium-sized fish in a larger pool with maybe one natural rival if that rival isn't moved, which, again, I say the founding of FC Cincinnati may be an indicator that MLS is still determined to move Columbus because they've got another Ohio team now. But if Columbus stays, that's the only rivalry they've got. It'll be one of the few that actually could be a real rivalry in the MLS. If Columbus goes, they got nothing, and it'll not be as good. That's what I've got to say about FC Cincinnati. I do wish them luck. God bless them, and I hope they succeed. I just don't think that everybody should think that they're going to boom. Everybody should have more realistic expectations here. And after we get the bump for the first 3 to 5 years, the honeymoon period, then we'll see what's going to be the reality in Cincinnati. If you like what you've seen here today, which I doubt very few people are going to, hit the like button. If you like what you see around here generally, you can hit subscribe. If you want to see my most watched video, probably other than this, or most reacted to other than the other one I talked about, FC Cincinnati, you can go watch my cricket video, which I just kind of did off the cuff and seemed to draw a lot of attention, particularly from the subcontinent. Anyway, if you like what you see around here, generally subscribe. If you want to contact me directly, you can get me on Twitter at @LammersK, at LA2MsERSK. If you want to leave comments below, leave comments below. I can't guarantee I will reply to all of them. So far, the trickle of comments I've gotten have been enough. I can, but I do have a day job. My boss expects me to actually work. I know it's kind of, and so I don't expect I'm going to be able to reply to all the comments that I get, on my posts. And all I've got really to say beyond that is, if you got some spare time and you got some spare cash, go watch some minor league sports. Y'all have a good week.